Okay, so we've got the Frankie model referenced in. We've saved this in our bind folder, and just to let you know, in the reference editor we can see Frankie is referenced there with a prefix. This window was our I've got a dual monitor set up, so for this recording I've got single, so it appeared off screen, but there in the reference editor you can see the hierarchy of referencing as you build them. So that's the first one. Okay. So what we need to do now is for the bind file, we need to literally set up the skeleton ready to skin weight the geometry to it. So again, I've created a series of videos on joints and joint orientation. So if you want a quick recap, just have a look at those. But ultimately, let's start and set up. Okay. Now with always with setting up joints and creating joint chains, I always work in orthographic first. To lay down the initial joints. That way I know that the joints are all in the same plane, and then it becomes a lot easier to manipulate. Okay, so let's start with the legs, and generally the easiest thing to do for the legs is to literally put the model in side view and create the joint chain this way. Okay, a few things that will help is go to shading, X-ray joints, and also I find wireframe unshaded might help as well. Ultimately, because you can see the structure of your geometry, and that might help with edge loops and placement of joints. Okay. So we need to be in the animation submenu, and we will see skeleton joint tool. So let's roughly start placing the joints in side view. Okay, and literally for the legs, obviously this is the thigh, the knee, the ankle, the toe, and the toe end. Maya, you always create the end joint, which is not necessarily used for skinning, but it's used for rigging. If you want to use IK, you need that end joint. Okay. When setting up legs and arms, I always put a slight bend in the joint chain, just because when you set up the IK, Maya knows specifically which way to bend. If you created a straight leg and set up IK, it could bend backwards and you have to set up the preferred angle, but if you create a joint chain that's slightly bent, it knows ultimately which way to go straight away. Okay. So obviously the first time you do it in orthographic, it puts it in the center, and that's where you need to start kind of aligning the joint chain to properly fit with a model. When you create it in orthographic, it's kind of the best fit, and so you need to start manipulating the joint chain in perspective to get it properly aligned. Okay. So always the first one is the move the whole joint chain by the top of the root node of the chain. But ultimately, before we do that, and before we go any further, let's look at the joint orient, the local rotation axes of the joints. Okay, so just as a temporary thing, I'm just going to hide the polys, and I've got a a shortcut for select hierarchy, so just select that top one, select hierarchy, and that selects all the joints, and then I can view local rotation axes. I've got a shortcut which is just literally display, transform, display local rotation axis. Okay, so you can see here that the majority of my joints, Z is facing the left, but where I've got the joints bending backwards, Z is pointing to the right. Okay, and always the end joint is slightly at a different angle. The easiest way to do that is select the end joint, bring up your attribute editor, and in your joint orients just zero that end joint out. Okay, and by zeroing out the end joint, it will assume what its parent orientation is. So that's nice and easy, that one. Okay, so this one I will need to spin it around in the X 180 degrees. Okay, so I use the Comet Joint Orient tool, which I can click on here. You can get it quite freely on the internet. It's such a useful tool, and really the kind of the best thing about this tool is that you can manually tweak it by a set amount in either the X, Y, or Z axis. Okay, so let's say I'm going to flick it by 90 degrees at a time in the X, because I'm spinning it around. So every time I click this button, it will spin it by 90 degrees. So once, twice, and it's aligned all the joints correctly. Okay, so that's how easy changing local rotation axes of joints is using that tool. And you can see now that all my joints are Z is facing left, and if I click on that joint itself, you can see I've got no values in rotation and literally no values in rotate axis. Literally all the rotation values have been absorbed by joint orient, and that's where you really need to be for all the joints. So literally the only values you need for joints are on joint orient, and that keeps it nice and simple and rigid. Okay, so now that all the local rotation axes are facing the right way, I can select hierarchy, hide the local rotation axes, bring back my character, and literally start to place the joint chain in the right position. So I literally place the thigh, try to get the position of the thigh in the center of the model as much as you can. Let me just check I've got discrete move on there. That's why it was jumping. That's better. So it's now moving freely, and literally I try to place the thigh joint. When you lift the leg, the thigh will kind of crease round about this point here. So that's where I put the thigh. So try to get it in as much in the middle at the front, and as much in the middle when you're at the side. Okay. Now, obviously, the character's being modelled with the legs not facing forward, which is really unnatural. So the whole chain needs to be rotated out, and you can actually do that as long as you do it just on the main route. Okay. By just rotating it on the main route, you are keeping the actual plane intact. Okay, and this is important for IK. So let's just check. Yep, discrete rotate is off. Sometimes if you need a little bit more finesse, just press the plus key to increase your icon, and you just get a little bit more finesse. Okay, and roughly have it so that the legs are roughly facing the toe. Okay, minus will minimize the icon, so you can see that the plane is facing down the toe. Okay, but ultimately what that means now is, because I've lowered the thigh, the knee is quite a lot lower, and I want the knee to be kind of in the center of where the knee actually will bend. Okay, so for all the joints underneath the main root, you literally should only use translate X, which takes it closer. Don't forget, translate X is the distance to its parent. And if you want to rotate it a little bit from here on, just make sure I'm in local. Okay, only rotate in the plane, which in this case is the z-axis. So okay, so that's the knee roughly in position. Again, rotate it in the z-axis, and the ankle joint here should be literally where the ankle is, which is roughly about right. Okay, and then again I'm just going to rotate the toe down a little bit, again only in the z-axis, so I've got just translate X and rotate Z, and I'll just rotate that up a little bit. Okay, and the end joint, it doesn't really matter where that is, just by habit I just kind of always just put it just slightly in front of the mesh, but by only rotating in the z-axis, I've kept the plane intact. Okay, so let's just rotate that a little bit, and maybe out a little bit like that. Just check that looks good. Okay, and the last thing to do, because literally I rotated the main joint, I was free to rotate that in all axes, but any joint after that should only be rotated in the plane itself. But literally after you've done that, and it's the joint chain is where you want it to be, if you freeze transforms, translate, rotate and scale, make sure joint orient is off, otherwise your joints will align with the world, and apply. Okay, and literally what that does is restore the rotations back to 0, and puts those rotations on your joint orient, and literally all the child joints should just have translate X. Okay, just translate X and translate X. Okay, so that's all now into place, and then the last thing we need to do is literally name the joints. Okay, so I've at the moment got joint 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's call this, let's give it a prefix of bind underscore, let's call this thigh underscore left underscore JNT. Okay, and the prefix is important. Literally make sure you give it a good prefix. For the rig, we will give that a prefix of rig when we set up that skeleton, and all the joints that you will incorporate as part of the skin weighting, call underscore JNT. So make sure you're consistent with that. bind underscore knee underscore left underscore JNT. Then this one is bind underscore ankle left JNT. Bind underscore toe underscore left JNT, and literally this end joint is just there as a termination joint, so I'm going to call this bind underscore toe underscore left and give that the suffix of end. Okay, and by doing that I can also filter out all the joints by doing a search filter of star underscore JNT, so I can filter it out if I want to as well. Okay, so that's the leg setup. Let's save that scene and I'll start another video where we carry on with the skeleton. Okay, so file, save scene as, we're in the bind folder, and literally I'm going to start my iterations. Okay, Frankie 01, and then literally once I'm happy with the way that's going and I want to feed it back into the reference, I will save over Frankie, which is the main publish file. Okay, but all the work in progress will start now numbering. So Frankie 01 and save, and that's the leg setup.